All right, hey everyone. I just want to give you a quick update both on yesterday's assignment as well as what you're going to be doing for today's assignment. So let's get right into it. All right, here's yesterday's assignment. There was two steps: the reading video or video reading and graphic organizer, and then down here a word bank that you use to fill in this table right here. I didn't even bother to fill in separation of powers and checks and balances. They are identical between the U.S. Constitution and the Georgia Constitution. When we talk about separation of powers, what we really mean is that each branch of government, legislative, executive, judicial, has their own separate responsibility and role in the lawmaking process or in the governing process. So if you look here, the legislative branch makes the laws. That's their specific power. They are responsible for coming up and developing the language for the laws. Next up is the executive branch. So that's this right here. It's the executive branch's responsibility to execute the laws or to enforce the laws that are created and passed by the legislative branch. Okay. So in the lawmaking process specifically, really only the legislative branch and the executive branch are involved. After something becomes a law, after a bill becomes a law and the executive branch begins to enforce it, at that point it's open for interpretation by the judicial branch specifically, and in some cases the Supreme Court. This applies to both the U.S. government and Georgia's government, all right? So if the law goes into effect and there's evidence that there's some sort of problem with it, then the court can step in and say, hey, this law, it violates this part of our Constitution and therefore we can't have it. We call that power of the judicial branch judicial review. All right, and we'll talk more about that in the next unit. As far as checks and balances go, this is a phrase you'll hear throughout your life. Okay, it's a fundamental organizing principle of our government. And the idea is that each branch has there's a network of powers that each branch has that keeps the other branches from running away with all of the powers. So one of the concerns at the founding of our republic was that, for example, the executive branch, that it would become too much like a king, president, governor. And so they needed a way to make sure that didn't happen. Another concern was that the legislative branch would be too subject to the back and forth everyday whims of the larger society, and there needed to be a stabilizing force in the executive branch. Okay, but there was a concern that maybe the masses, the people, could run away with all of the power, so they needed a way to keep that in check. And so we've developed this very complicated, and we're not going to go into all of them, but this very complicated system of checks and balances. And just a couple examples are the ability of the executive branch to veto bills, to stop bills that the legislative branch has passed. Another check is the ability of the legislative branch to override that veto. Okay? And finally, the third major component of checks and balances that you need to remember for this class is the power of judicial review, the ability of the courts to declare laws unconstitutional. All right. Down here, we're comparing and contrasting Georgia's Constitution and the U.S. Constitution. There are a lot of similarities, okay? Really, the differences come down to just some minor things, like titles. For example, Georgia's executive branch is headed up by the governor, whereas in the U.S. Government, it's headed up by the president. Georgia must maintain a balanced budget, meaning it can't spend more than it takes in. That is not true for the U.S. government. And Georgia's state constitution, because of the fact that it has to deal with local governments and all of those different counties and whatnot, it has hundreds of amendments, whereas the U.S. government, the U.S. Constitution, only has 27. Okay. Now, similarities, they both have three branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial. Both have a Bill of Rights, though there should be one thing that is different. The Bill of Rights in the Georgia Constitution is in the Articles section, while in the U.S. Constitution, it's in the Amendments section, okay, at the end. Both constitutions have a preamble, articles, and amendments. Those are basic sections of constitutions in the United States. Both the U.S. government and the Georgia state government are considered to be bicameral, meaning they have two houses, a House of Representatives and a Senate. And in both have their own Supreme Court. So there's the Georgia Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court. And finally, both are based on this principle of separation of powers, where each branch has its own responsibility. All right, so that about covers it. If you haven't submitted this assignment yet, please go ahead and do so. You have the answer key at this point, so there's really no excuse. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at today's assignment. All right, today's assignment is pretty straightforward. You're going to read the information here about taxes, and all I want you to do is just define what each one of these taxes are. So there's income tax, general sales tax, or just sales tax, and then property tax. A lot of times, what it is in the name. All right, so there's your first clue. Okay. And then down here, we do a quick review over the qualifications for office in Georgia. You need to fill in this graphic organizer. So for the Senate, the House of Representatives, the governor, and lieutenant governor, how many years do you have to be a resident of Georgia in order to be able to run for that office? How many years do you need to be a U.S. citizen? How old do you need to be? And then finally, how long are the terms for if they win? Okay, so how long is the governor in office before he needs to run for re-election? How long is a senator in office before he or she needs to run for re-election? Okay, that about covers it. I'll do office hours on Thursday between 1 and 1:30. If you got any questions, also feel free to send me a message either through Google Classroom or to shoot me an email. All right, have a good day.